Hello and welcome to episode number 160 of Gatekeeper, פרק 160, שומר סף, and it is my pleasure to have today on this show Dave Rubin of the famous Rubin Report. Hi, Dave.
Gotti, it's good to be with you. I do have to warn your audience, we're going to have to do this in English, although I could do it in very, very broken Ivrit and say a couple things that will make no sense. I could maybe get you to the Sheru team. But hopefully we can have a fruitful conversation nonetheless.
Maybe when I get to ask you who you are going to apologize to in Yom Kippur, you can switch to Hebrew in case anyone in America might hold you accountable.
I like that. I like that.
So you're in Florida now, and you guys are under the weather. What's going on?
Yeah, there was a massive, massive storm, this Hurricane Ian. It was basically one tick below a category 5, which is in some ways really the highest level you're going to get. But it wasn't just the strength of the storm. This thing was absolutely huge. About 20 years ago, a hurricane called Charlie hit Florida, which was massive and caused crazy destruction. And Charlie, I'm told, would have fit in the eye of this hurricane, to show you the severity and the size of this thing. So it crushed Southwest Florida. My parents have a place in Sanibel Island. That really was ground zero for this thing.
Wow.
The island is pretty much demolished. Fortunately, they were not there. But the island is going to be hurting for many years to come. And all over Florida. I mean, there's millions of people without power. And you just have to hope and pray. And, fortunately, I'm sure we're going to talk about him. But Ron DeSantis is the governor here. I really believe he is in some ways the leader of the Western world at the moment. Although this new incoming Italian prime minister is trying to vie to get in there, Meloni. But he's really been the leader on what freedom is and expressing the ideas of individuality and limited government and all of these things, and that you should make choices over your life. So we have a really well-run state. So although this is a disaster, as he said, of biblical proportions, and I know your viewers can appreciate the Bible, we're doing everything possible, and I'm going to help in any way that I can.
And I have to tell our listeners and viewers that you moved to Florida not long ago. We met in Orlando, and you were all smiles about moving to the land of the free and the home of the brave.
So we met at NatCon, which was the National Conservatism Conference. We met, it was 11 months ago. I remember it was the end of October in 2021. And I had just decided that I could not take it in Cali anymore. The lockdowns, the vaccine mandates, the endless misery, progressive politics, the crime, the drugs, all of it. And I saw you at NatCon, and then I left from NatCon to spend a weekend in Miami to find a house. I found a house. I was out of there on December 17th, and I've been here since then. And I love it here. This is a beacon of freedom. This is as Israel often refers, or people refer to Israel as sort of a light in the darkness. That's what Florida is right now from an American perspective. And as I said earlier with DeSantis, it's like, in some ways, it's a worldwide perspective. If Florida had not fought the way that it did, America could look way worse. We have plenty of problems right now, but we could look way worse than we do right now. So I'm very proud to live here. That's why, I want to help as much as I can my newfound home. And I want to make sure that all the good things here that people fought for before me are strengthened by me being here.
DeSantis 2024, you think?
Look, it all comes down to Trump at the end of the day, because if Trump runs, it gets very messy. I think there's a lot of people that sort of want to see that fight. I can tell you this, as you know, and I've said several times, I love this state. I know he loves this state. From an American perspective, and this is very different than an Israeli perspective, we have states' rights. And, New Jersey, which is one of our smallest states, is in essence the size of Israel. We have these 50 states that were designed to have very different laws, have different ways of life, have different taxes, all of these things, so that there would be this constant experiment of what works and what doesn't work. Florida, I want to stay as strong as possible right now. And sometimes I fear that maybe our federal government is just so messed up that even a guy like DeSantis wouldn't be able to fix it. I mean, Trump went in there to drain the swamp, and ultimately the swamp drained him. So look, let's put it this way. Regardless, I'm going to vote for a Republican one way or another because I think the Democrat Party has gone so off the deep end, which is obviously not a position that I held, say, even 7 or 8 years ago. But I'm okay with them working it out. I want them to work it out. I would prefer they sit down and do it privately than just fight publicly. But as some people have said, there's a little bit of value in them battling it out. If they get on a debate stage together, if they're really both vying to be president, I think it's going to make it much harder for Trump. It was easy for Trump, who I supported last time, to, kind of bully certain people. But a guy like DeSantis, all he has to do is kind of stand there and say, hey, this is my record, man. You can call me whatever you want. This is what I've done over these last couple of years. And there's really no way around that. So they have to work something out.
And he's incredibly confident, and you sense his integrity and confidence, and that's reassuring. I have two editions of your book. I got the audio too. So, and you read the audio.
I do read the audio. It's a great joy.
It's actually fun. You feel like you have a conversation with the author. And let me show the book on screen. It's called "Don't Burn This Country: Surviving and Thriving in Our Woke Dystopia." And it's a fun book, but it's not a fun subject.
Well, talking about the end of Western civilization is not, fun, let's say. But as I try to do on my show every day, when I'm talking about these serious things that we're talking about here, and whether the West can survive, and whether socialism and communism and all the bad ideas of the past are about to burst forth again and really take hold, I try to do it in a way that keeps people somewhat entertained, a little bit of a smile on my face and a little bit of humor, because, you can turn on any channel from an American perspective. You could watch Fox or MSNBC or CNN, or, I know you guys have several different news channels, although it sounds like most of them, you got pretty much what we have, right? Like everything basically leans left. I think there's kind of one right-leaning channel.
Which they're trying to close now. The government is now trying to close that one. How surprised are you?
Surprise, surprise. Isn't it something? I mean, that really, if there's anything to learn over the last 20 years and maybe 100 years from now, when they look back on this very bizarre time that we live in, that in the 20 years of the internet, where we really were communicating with each other and social media and all that, how the world, we exported problems to each other all over the place, so that America's problems immediately become Israel's problems when that doesn't really make sense. And, Canada's problems become Mexico's problems, and European countries become problems in Africa. And then at the same time, we've had revolutions because of this, sometimes good, sometimes bad. I mean, there's something really incredible happening in Iran right now. Look what happened to Mubarak in Egypt. There's all sorts of upheaval because of the internet. And it's almost as if there's just this power that is out there, and we don't know how to we can't control it. It's not that we don't know how to control it. We cannot control it. It is part of all of us, and we're just trying to walk through this technological adolescence. It is not easy.
Part of what's really scary in the book that you describe is the growing cooperation between big tech, law enforcement, left-leaning bureaucracy, and the Democratic Party. What would you highlight as the scary thing here?
Yeah, I mean, what's basically happened is that a whole bunch of bad ideas got stuck in all of our institutions, whether they were our political institutions or our cultural institutions or our tech institutions. Wokeness, you have to give it credit. I mean, I always say this on the show, and I describe this in the book. It's like a parasite. If you remember the movie Alien, the original Alien movie from 1977, and there's a really incredible. It can't live by itself. So first off, it needs something to feed on. So what did wokeness need? It was a really bad set of ideas, a bad set of collectivist ideas, but it needed the individual to feed on. And that's why it has worked so well with young people whose minds are malleable, who don't know exactly what they think yet or why they think. And then you suddenly get told that, if you're white, you're guilty of this, or everyone's racist. Or if you're a boy, you're not actually a boy, you're potentially a girl, or any of these nonsensical ideas. But in the movie Alien, the way I describe it is, if you remember, the alien is killing everyone on the ship. And then there's only a few people left. And Sigourney Weaver's character is talking to the doctor. and it's killed all of their comrades. And Sigourney is shocked because the doctor actually admires the alien because it is merciless. It has no regret. It has no morals. It's just doing what it wants to accomplish. And I think that's very similar to what the woke have done with us. You may think that these people are all clowns and they have bad ideas and AOC's an idiot. And maybe your audience, I don't know enough exactly about Israeli politics, but maybe your audience is going, boy, those Meretz people are all ridiculous lefty fools or whatever. But you know what? They've done a certain amount of damage to institutions that we all took for granted. So when I talk about it in the book, combining big tech, which now censors you, if I was to go on Twitter right now and say that actress Ellen Page was wonderful in X-Men, well, she's known as Elliot Page. She or he, whatever, is known as Elliot Page now. I might get banned from Twitter. Jordan Peterson is no longer on Twitter for basically saying just that. So the political correctness gets exported into big tech. Then all of these companies, they bring in these diversity, equity, and inclusion departments, and they literally are firing white people and hiring black people. And by the way, that you wouldn't want to do that on the basis of the color of their skin. This is the constant confusion that these people have. They say, oh, well, we want to help the marginalized or something. We want to help these people. Well, what they always forget, of course, is that it's not that you can just raise all of these people. You have to take other people down. So there are countless examples of just white people of a certain age being fired from jobs or told they're not going to get promotions or whatever else. Or look what's going on at Harvard. I mean, the Asians at Harvard are basically the new Jews. There used to be quotas at Ivy League schools to keep Jews out because Jews studied and worked hard and family was important and were playing by the rules. And they felt there were too many Jews there. Well, then that happened, say 30, 40 years ago. What's going on now? Now there's too many Asians. I thought that counting people by their race was racist, but apparently not in this new world order.
And it's also, there's this new truth that's supposedly self-evident, that if there's unequal representation, that means discrimination.
Yes, and that's actually horrible.
There's actually, if you look at the general market, why are there so many Koreans in dry cleaning in New York? Is that discrimination in some way? And there's actually people keep forgetting that the American Supreme Court debated this in a case called Sears Reebok, I think, yep, versus the Equal Opportunity and Employment Commission, and they reached the conclusion that unequal representation sometimes has to do with the cultural preferences of the group that's supposedly discriminated, but no one pays attention to this. And now, if you open a Starbucks, you need to have proportional representation of all races in somehow in your staff.
The anti-racists are the racists. It's as simple as that. I'm not saying that there are no racists, say on the right or that are Republicans. Of course there are. Are there KKK members and some white supremacists? Of course. But they have no institutional power. I can tell you, I mean, I go to really right-wing conservative events with yarmulke-wearing Ben Shapiro and the most Jewy Jew, Dennis Prager, and nobody
and Yoram Hazony.
Jews. And Yoram Hazony, and I can give you a list of Jews, but I'm not like a lefty, so I don't have my list of Jews with me. But you can go to these things. These people do not hate Jews. They do not hate black people. They don't even hate gay people. It's not to say that they may have their own personal beliefs related to traditional marriage or whatever, but they certainly don't hate based on the sort of basis of hatred, something like that. And that's what we have to just really show people, that if you care about Western civilization, you should care about the individual first. And if you care about the individual, your capacity to reason and make decisions for yourself, then you can move up and you can build a bottom-up society that then, from an individual, you can have a family, and then you can have a community, and then you can have a state above that. I don't mean above it in a traditional sense. I mean that you can build something that's strong from the bottom, and the state then doesn't need to do that much. We've flipped the entire thing upside down right now.
Here's one thing that I have a reservation about, when maybe a footnote or a reservation to what's going on the American right now, and the people I identify with, you among them, who've been fighting against wokeness, is the description of wokeness only through the prism of of cultural Marxism, because my profession is American culture, it's American history, my professional training, but I'm an outsider, so often fish don't understand the concept of water, and if you're an outsider and you come to America, individualism is so ingrained in America that sometimes Americans don't identify it. And when I've been writing about, it wasn't called wokeness back then, it was called political correctness to start with. One of the features that seem to me paramount is their individualism, actually, because if you read Judith Butler, she is a descendant of Ralph Waldo Emerson, of the idea that the self is always constructed by the self. And then you look at the whole idea of transgender. Transgenderism is not a gender, it's the ability to move between genders. So isn't that a radicalization of, it's like the John Wayne self-made man is now the self-made transgendered individual.
Huh. That's an interesting way of looking at it, actually. I've never thought about it so specifically, but that sense that John Wayne was the ultimate individual from an American perspective, and that these people who are now they're doing sort of a very collectivist thing, but in a bizarre sense, I guess you could argue it's individualistic, something like that, I think is what you're saying. I've never thought about it so specifically like that, but I would say, broadly speaking, the scary part about this assault on the individual is that every single person, whether you're American or Israeli or Jordanian or whatever you might be, knows that you have the best opportunity to make decisions for yourself. It's as simple as that. That's not to say your parents can't give you some insight and you can't learn some good things and unfortunately maybe learn some bad things, and that maybe you can have a community around you that collectively can come up with the right ideas. And, Israel has an interesting history because it comes from socialist roots that eventually it grew out of to become really a capitalist powerhouse in a lot of ways. But in some ways also not purely capitalist. But I think there's a lot of reasons that you guys can get away with that as a tiny country that we struggle with because we're a multicultural country. But we all know the individual is the most important thing. You know what I mean? Like you and I could agree on 95% of politics, but I can't tell you how to live your life in the most intimate way. You have to figure that out. And these people that have tricked all of these people into thinking that, no, you could just magically change your gender. And if you get all of these surgeries, that you will suddenly be more whole or more complete. I mean, it's also bizarre because these are the same people that say gender doesn't matter. So on one hand, gender doesn't matter. And on the other hand, you should spend hundreds of thousands of dollars and mutilate your body and all these things so that you can be the other gender. Well, it doesn't matter. And you also must be the other one. And if everyone doesn't behave the way you want during that entire process, you should be able to cancel them. So it's very conflicting because once you take anything out of the individual and we just represent these ideas, this is what Meloni was saying in her speech in Italy, her acceptance speech. Once you take the individual out and you say, no, I can be defined by my gender or my religion or my sexuality or whatever it might be, you're removing yourself from the equation. You are now just a little thing in a bucket. And a little thing in a bucket can't get much done.
What's your take on Meloni in general? The first reaction here was fascist on the left, like mainstream media.
Yes, of course. I mean, that's what everyone's doing here. She's far right. She's a fascist, racist. I mean, look, until the last week or so, I had never heard of her. I'm not an expert in Italian politics, so I won't pretend to be. However, I did listen to the entire speech. I thought it was one of the best speeches I've heard from a Western leader in probably maybe 3 decades since Ronald Reagan.
In Italian.
Oh, and her accent is great, and it's
just mamma.
It's just beautiful. They have a beautiful language, obviously. I thought it was wonderful, and I thought it's resonating with all of the right people here, and I hope that it's tipping off some of our political leaders to understand you can walk into the fire, you can say these things that we know are true, and that you're not going to be destroyed. And I think that maybe it'll be a little bit of a turning point of the West. We talked about that interconnectivity of all of these countries. Well, it's like what happens in Italy doesn't just stay in Italy. Now it can be exported. And, when Brexit happened and Trump happened, these were mass movements happening across the pond. So maybe some leaders here and maybe some leaders in Israel will be a little bit more brave to say these things. But I certainly didn't hear anything racist out of her. Having borders is not racist. I didn't hear anything bigoted in any other way from her. I mean, I heard basic stuff that we know to be true, which unfortunately is dangerous to say right now. And also on the fascism point, you know, from an American perspective, the Democrats are if we're doing who's a fascist, the Democrats love state and corporate power combined, right? Look what just happened with
and
COVID.
they supported slavery. If you're judged by your roots and your predecessors, then
of course, the Republican Party was founded on the idea of eliminating slavery. We can go into the Whig Party and why Abraham Lincoln left. I mean, there's a long history there. But the point is, look at the last 2 years of COVID. Who was combining government power and state and corporate power to control people, which is in essence the basic definition of fascism? It was the Democrats. It was the Democrats who were colluding with big tech to silence dissent on COVID. So that might be a violation of the First Amendment, but it's certainly fascistic in its nature. And then who were literally using government influence to tell companies they had to fire people if they didn't get their injection. It was the Democrats. So if we're playing who's the fascist here, I would recommend that the Democrats get a mirror.
This is a fascinating issue because the anti-vaxxers in Israel are the leftists. So
well, they used to be. That was the thing. They were in America. It was the sort of hipstery, lefty Berkeley, anti-government, whatever. But they love the power now. So we have a very similar take on that. I mean, but you know what? It would be completely flipped if it had been Trump forcing all of these things, and when Trump was president, and that's also the problem. You need to believe in something. And if what you believe in is only politics, then depending on who's in power, you will literally believe anything, whether you like the guy or not. And we've seen a lot of that over the last couple of years.
One of the reasons I started with the humor in your book is that I think we don't have enough of it on the right. And this is not just, I always suspect people without a sense of humor. I think they're dangerous, but that's not the whole story. Part of the story is that in Israel, and I think in America maybe to a lesser extent, the right has an inferiority complex, and it doesn't know how to be condescending. It just doesn't. And partly what you do in your book is you show how ridiculous some of these ideas are, and it's I think it's important to do it tongue in cheek. But you also there's also a bit of biography in your book. So there's two things I wanted to talk with you about. One of them is your move from the left to the right. You started out wanting to be a stand-up comedian in New York, was it?
Gotti, I used to be funny a long time ago. Yeah, I was a stand-up comic in New York from 1998 to about 2011 or 12 or so. And that came with the successes and the failures and the struggles and handing out tickets in Times Square and all of that stuff. And it's kind of funny now because thankfully, because of my show, I have an audience who, when I go on a book tour, I can sell out a theater now. And, I don't do sort of traditional, here's all my jokes stand-up, but I can just be funny in the room with the crowd and talk about what's on my mind. And I interact a lot with the crowd. And I think that really is something that the right has not done that well. But that's partly because the left has owned the culture for so long. Yeah. But if you want to know a great point of evidence of how that's shifting, we have, 6 or 7 late night talk shows, The Tonight Show, and I don't even know what they're called anymore, but, these were these main staples on network television for years. They're all lefty shows, all of them. The hosts are all lefty, Jimmy Kimmel and the whole crew, and Stephen Colbert, all of these people. The number one show in late night is now Greg Gutfeld's show on Fox News. Greg, who's obviously a Fox conservative, and he's got about 4 writers on the show. I go on the show all the time, and it's the number one show in cable news. That tells you, boy, if people build it, if you build something good and funny and interesting, they'll find you. And that's also why they're always looking to censor us, because if they can't censor us, people go, boy, these right-wingers aren't really as bad as I thought.
And they're no longer funny. They're so ideological that they can't be funny. Look what happened to Saturday Night Live. Look what happened to all of Hollywood. And what's heartbreaking to me, The Onion. Since The Onion became Never Trump, they lost it. It used to be so amazingly funny. I studied in New York when you could still pick it up on the subway. It was a square kind of newspaper. It was great.
Yeah. They're all awful. Wokeness destroys everything that it touches. It's as simple as that. And then once you see that and you start listening to the jokes, you listen to the monologues with these people, they're very bitter and angry. And they hate half the country and all of these things. That's been a real revelation for me as I went through this political shift, because if you look at it this way, if I was in a room, or think about it, anyone listening to this, if you're in a room with a bunch of conservatives and a liberal walks in or a lefty walks in, for the most part, everyone's going to be pretty nice. Everyone might ask them, what they think about things, and they might get into a political conversation. It's very unlikely that they'll be yelled at or kicked out or anything like that. People behind their back might be like, boy, this guy's a real schmuck. But it would be a some level of respect within that. Like, we can exist in the same space. Now try to do the reverse of that. You're at a lefty party and a conservative walks in. Nobody will want to talk to that person. He will most likely be kicked out, and he will be called all of the worst things. And that is what the danger of what the left has done has caused by calling. I mean, you can watch videos of mine 6 or 7 years ago as a lefty. You can watch me saying, this is a huge flaw, guys, and we better fix it. Because once you call everyone a bigot and a racist and a Nazi and a homophobe, it's not what you're doing to them. It's what you're doing to yourself. You've painted yourself into a corner. It's very hard. This was the risk with Trump the entire time. I said this the day after the election. I did a video. I didn't even have a studio yet. I had just moved into a new home. I'm sitting in my backyard. There's construction behind me. And I said, guys, and I didn't vote for Trump the first time. I said, look, he's going to be president. So everyone better ease up, because what if he turns out not to be Hitler? What if what if the economy is working? What if foreign policy is working? If you've called this guy Hitler, you can't suddenly be like, Hitler ain't that bad. And I think that's what's caused so much of the craziness on the left. They gave themselves no off-ramp. And when you have no off-ramp, you start going nuts.
And that turned into a complete witch hunt, which is crazy. And this happened in Israel and in America in much the same way. In the fact that Trump is hounded by law enforcement, and so is Netanyahu. And in both cases, law enforcement keeps leaking to the press from the investigation. And until in the end, what you see is it's not that the press is subordinate to law enforcement. It's that law enforcement turned into the investigative arm of a smear campaign. There's nothing you can... It was very obvious after the Mueller report was put out that there was no fire behind all that manufactured smoke.
The Mueller report, they impeached Trump twice. Now they've done this Mar-a-Lago thing. Nothing's going to come of that. They are using the power of the state to destroy dissent. I mean, I know it was worse in Israel because, if I'm not mistaken, Sarah Netanyahu ate ice cream or something, right? People must have been freaking out about that. Yeah. He had like 3 scoops or something. You got a national emergency. But that same treatment, quickly on Netanyahu, it's interesting because from an American perspective, or I guess I can only speak for myself, but I know certainly in conservative circles, people love Bibi. They see him as strong, and he cares about his country. He cares about America. He's an incredible orator when he, speaks at the UN General Assembly, gets up there and defends not only his country, but the ideas of freedom and all of those things. I sense that if I lived in Israel, I'd probably have some more issues with him, or maybe he was in power too long, or whatever it might be. But there's only so many leaders in the West that can sort of really defend their country against all of the attacks. And Israel, as an obscenely tiny country with a cultural history that is obviously, very painful, and it's a miracle that Jews are still here. I mean, it's a true miracle after everything. Pogroms and Holocausts and all of the stuff. Israel needs leaders that are strong and clear and concise. And, I know you have elections every 3 weeks. So by the time we finish this conversation, you could have another prime minister.
But by the time it gets subtitles, it'll take us. It will be after Yom Kippur. There's a story that I didn't know about your early career, is that you had basically a pirate show in an NBC studio. Is that a good description?
Yeah, we did. I hope that if they ever make a movie about me, that this will be what the movie's about. We did something really incredible. I was about 21, 22. I'm doing stand-up with a couple guys, and we're thinking, we should have a show. We wanted some kind of something like The Daily Show, which would was just taking off with Jon Stewart, but something with a couple people at a desk. We're going to talk about news and do some silly bits and all this stuff. And we thought, all right, let's do this. Can we do it at a theater or where at a comedy club? And one of my friends worked at NBC. He was a page, which in essence is like a glorified intern. And there was a studio. I believe it was on the ninth floor. I think Saturday Night Live was the eighth floor. It might be the ninth floor. But above Saturday Night Live, there was a studio that they used as part of the studio tour. So tourists could come in and they could see what a little TV studio would look like. But it wasn't a functional studio. It was, they weren't shooting anything there. It was just that it was this place you could go look. We took over that studio. We took NBC letterhead. We put on a real show. We did, I think, 8 episodes. We'd had a studio show of about 100 people would come in. We had a warm-up comic. We used the Saturday Night Live green room. We used props from Saturday Night Live. And we did this over and over and over. And then, post 9/11, we did the first maybe 6 before 9/11. After 9/11, the security situation in New York City obviously got very different. Then it got a little more difficult to do. And the reason that probably all of your viewers or listeners have never heard of the show or seen it is because, believe it or not, this was before YouTube. And it's hard to imagine a world before YouTube. But what we'd get a little cassette tape with the video. We put it on New York City public access TV. We had a little cult following, but we had no way of getting it to mainstream.
But someone knew how to operate the studio. Someone knew how to.
We brought in my friend who was the page, knew other technical people. We had all of these people that worked at NBC who were working for us on the DL.
And nobody found out. It was a
magical thing. Nobody found out. Eventually, we did get a write-up in New York Observer, which was, I don't even know if it exists anymore, but it was a big New York City newspaper. It was a cover story about us. And then it got very complex. So, my friends that worked at NBC suddenly were a little nervous to really go all the way and go take this thing to Hollywood, so to speak. And it didn't work out, but it's a beautiful story. I mean, it's all true. We full on put on a television show that was better than anything at NBC and nobody knew about it.
Crazy story. And so then after that, it was 2013 that you started the Rubin Report. You started it at home.
Yeah. So I moved to Los Angeles in 2013. I had a show on Sirius XM. And I sort of wanted to be seen, radio. I actually love radio. I love talk radio. And if we shut the cameras off, there's a little something that's different. Your body language changes. There's a little bit of something that I think becomes more ephemeral and pleasant in a way.
And but
I was doing radio and I just thought I want to be seen again. And also YouTube was really blowing up. There was suddenly this new world. I could see this new world. And a friend of mine who I had done stand-up with for many years, do you guys get the Big Bang Theory in Israel? Did that make it to Israel?
Yeah, I don't know it enough myself, but I've heard the name.
So my friend Melissa played a character named Bernadette on the Big Bang Theory, Melissa Rauch. Also a Jew, by the way.
Yeah. It's about this dork guy.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I remember. Yeah, they keep talking physics, and it's a sitcom. Yeah.
That's it. So Melissa had moved out to LA and she said, Dave, you got to get out here. This is where it's all happening. And I decided to take the plunge and I ended my Sirius XM radio show. I moved to LA. That's where I started doing the original version of the Rubin Report, which at the time I was a lefty. I was on the Young Turks network, a far left network. And then really after only a year and a half of being there and probably even before that, by 6 months, I started realizing something is wrong with the left. And once I started calling it out, then it's like a wave has just hit and there's nothing you can do. You go, oh man, have I been on the wrong side this whole time? Are all these other people not so evil? But, unless you put blinders on, you see it and then you got to figure out what to do.
So let's finish with a short description of this shift, and please try to be longer than Thomas Sowell was when you asked him the same question.
I'll give you one word.
Yeah.
Fact.
Yeah. So how did this shift happen?
Well, there were a few things that happened, and I do describe some of them in my first book. One of my really sort of seminal moments that many people have seen, it's probably been seen 20 million times on YouTube, is I had Larry Elder on. Larry Elder's a conservative radio host who happens to be Black. We started talking about systemic racism, and he just beat me over the head with facts. And we aired the episode as is. I did not edit it. And I started thinking a little bit differently about things. I started asking more questions. I started talking to new people. Once I talked to Larry Elder, I talked to Shapiro, I talked to Prager, I talked to Glenn Beck, and I found these people that I thought were these mean, angry conservatives who only cared about war and money. They actually were quite nice. And although I had some disagreements with them. And by the way, I still do. I consider myself begrudgingly pro-choice for at least, let's say, 12 or 15 weeks. That's completely against what most conservatives believe. But yet I am still invited to these conservative events to discuss these things. Again, that goes to what we were talking about earlier, but it's a fundamental difference between the mind of a conservative. The labels don't even make sense as much anymore, but the mind of a conservative versus the mind of a liberal or a lefty. So I had a few wake-up moments like that, but I will tell you that one of the wake-up moments had to do with Israel, because one of the years that I think it was around 2015, there was a war in Gaza, and I was on air with 5 of my lefty co-hosts, and they're ranting and raving about how evil Israel is and the genocide and all of this stuff. And I'm trying to explain to them calmly that actually Israel left Gaza. There's also a border with Egypt. Why aren't you upset with Egypt? You know that a country named Palestine never existed of a Palestinian people. There were Arabs that lived there, and Jews and Christians and all of this stuff. And I'm trying to calmly explain this. And they didn't know anything. All they knew was Israel evil, occupiers evil. They know nothing about history. They know nothing about nothing. I even got several of them to admit, once the cameras were off, that they didn't know what they were talking about. But this idea that you just know something, and no matter what fact comes through, you're going to cling on to that thing, was really one of my wake-up moments. If people want to watch it, it's out there somewhere. I mean, it's literally, it's a microcosm of the Middle East, because it's me versus 5 of these people, sort of like Israel versus 5 other nations.
Moral certitude combined with epistemological skepticism. It's a brew that creates a situation where you don't have to know anything and you can have an opinion on everything. And there's something incredibly powerful about that ignorance, because facts are just a disturbance to them, and
well, that's what it is. Facts are a disturbance. So there's a moment in one of these videos where I'm debating Israel with them, and one of the guys is screaming that this is a genocide in Gaza. And I kept saying, oh, well, actually, we can pull it up right now online, but, the population in Gaza goes up every year, actually. Sometimes it's
very
growing.
Failed genocide.
So, and it's like, Jews aren't bad at math. So what's going on here? Why is the Gazan population at times growing faster than the Israeli Jewish population? I mean, it's just endless. But they pick that idea. And that's why I think that's why my career ended up working, because I was I suppose a rare breed of a lefty who was willing to listen. And by the way, I would credit some of that to my upbringing and growing up. I grew up in a Jewish family in New York where we talked about everything. There's an old joke: if you've got 3 Jews at the table, you've got 4 opinions. And it's like, that's what we did, whether it was Rosh Hashanah or Passover or whatever. We argued about absolutely everything, the whole family. Even when I was at the kids' table, I'm the oldest of my generation, so I was always trying to get to the adult table. But I would get in the arguments, and then guess what? Dessert would be served, and everybody was good. We'd do it again the next night. That, I don't know if that's, at some level, it's a Jewish thing because of, arguing about the Talmud and all that, and that we've passed that down for a long time. But it's something that liberals used to relish, and unfortunately, there's very few of those liberals left.
Yeah, it's nice to hear this from an American, because my sense was that Americans can't handle disagreement. So
it's not Americans. It's not Americans. It really, I hate to say this because it sounds purely political or something, but it's basically everyone but modern liberals. I can go to libertarian events and I am welcomed with open arms. I'll give you one. I went to Liberty University. It is the largest evangelical college in the United States, founded by Jerry Falwell. They know that I'm Jewish. I happen to be gay. I am pro-choice. You would think that this would not be a place that I was invited. I spoke at their Sunday convocation. 14,000 people. 14,000. Wow. Huge amount of people. It felt like a political rally. Not only did I get a standing ovation, I spent the rest of the day wandering around campus, taking selfies with kids, shaking hands, hugging. We don't agree on everything, but so it's not really an American thing. It's not really an American thing. And that really is also the real shame of what they did with Trump. Because when Trump was in power, the Democrats could have gotten so much of what they wanted, but instead they said, we will just destroy this guy. They could have got an immigration deal they wanted. They could have had economic deals that they wanted. And instead, suddenly, they wanted to just destroy him And on top of the fact that we get these peace deals in the Middle East, which I thought everyone wanted peace in the Middle East, but it had something to do with Orange Man, thus no good.
Same in Israel. Dave Rubin, may I wish you Gmar Chatima Tova. May you be written in the book for favor for this year. And thank you so much for making the time for coming on this show.
Shana Tova, my friend. And as I said to you before we started, if things don't go well in Florida, I only got one other option, which is Israel. So, you got an extra room over there or what?
I was going to ask you the same thing because it's getting worse here. So I'm thinking of DeSantis land myself.
I'm actually more bullish on Florida. So you'll probably come this way. We'll see what happens.
Okay. Thanks very much, Dave.
Good to see you, Gotti.